All
Simeon,
right.
what are we doing today?
We're going to show off some new parts of V3, and I'm sharing my screen now, but mostly around custom input components. So we can show the config, we can show all sorts of things, but I think custom inputs are the real star here today in this demo.
So is the reason for that because the custom and the form builder APIs that Björga mentioned, so those are much simpler, and there was a bit of a barrier to entry for custom input components before, I think, because of that growing complexity that was mentioned. So we focus on delightful editorial experiences, and I think that building those components is a key part of that. So we've made it a lot easier for you to build things for your editors. Is that right?
That's correct. If we look at like the docs for this page here, which I've spent a lot of time on personally, building custom inputs, when it gets into building objects, you had to do all of this prop handling yourself. And as it was said, you have to pull out things like presents and markers for validation. You have to handle the entire UI, essentially rebuild the entire thing yourself and handle all of these props, which was a lot to deal with. And I think we'll show some examples today of how much simpler that's been made to create custom and complex components, which is really, really cool.
I'm excited. Let's get started.
All right.
So,
I think
sorry.
Oh, you go.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the easiest components or one of the most common components, I think, is to sort of search up information from an external source. We talk a lot about being composable and working within your organization. That's not as useful if you can't actually refer to other parts of the organization or other data sources. So I think like a component that fetches data and then patches it back to the studio was as complex as you were showing there. So maybe that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. So in this model here, we've got a dish, which is made up of several ingredients, and we can jump over to that ingredient reference. We can see here there's some like dietary information that'd be good to pull, and we could just type those numbers in ourselves, or we could pull that from a custom data source. Have a look.
So we're declaring that custom data source here, but we don't have a component for it yet. So I see that you've named components here, which is kind of similar to how we did it in V2, just having an input component field in the schema, slightly different syntax.
Yeah, because there's now going to be multiple different types of components, and you can choose which one to replace in part of the field. And you can see how fast the studio just rebundled when we hit save there. No more 2 or 3 seconds rebundling. I think you're going to save hours of work working in V3 very quickly, which is excellent.
Amazing.
So do we want to talk through this particular one? This one's hitting the USDA data source to be able to look up potatoes. I can never find, there are so many different types of potatoes. There we go.
Perfect. A perfect kind of potato. Yeah. So then we just did a fetch request. We fetched all of those autocomplete components. And I think if we look at how this sort of object, it's an object with just kind of child fields, right? Underneath the hood. Yeah. So very simple, very easy to query. But under the hood, this component itself is also not very complex.
No, that's right. We can jump and have a look at that component itself. Here's our, even though it is an object, which again was one of the more complex types, which was very difficult to handle, here we can just pull out the members. So objects and arrays now have this concept of members. So you can extract individual fields out of an array or an object and then handle them differently depending on what logic you want. So we've replaced the top field there with that autocomplete lookup, and then the bottom fields remain exactly the same as they were before. And that's all that you needed to do to generate those built-in fields.
Compared to the old documentation where you were pulling out presents and all kinds of other things.
Yeah, let's look at that side by side again. So yeah, just a little bit different syntax now.
Perfect. Amazing. So yeah, I think we lost form field. We lost a lot of the boilerplate here, but for sort of more complex tasks like plugins, for example, what's changed there?
Yeah, all right. Well, we'll jump over to another example there, and I'm actually going to switch workspace, which we saw before there. We've got different workspaces with different schemas registered, and I'm going to jump over to these people records here and pick out one here that doesn't yet have a title field. So we do have this idea of localizing content with internationalized fields, and that's what we're seeing on the left-hand side here. But that, again, is manual work to have to go and find a translation and paste that or author that back into the document. So we have a Google translate plugin, which let me find that one, which I've registered as a plugin on this one. Hang on, person. Live demo. Where did I put that thing? This is the input. Okay.
I was going to say props for live demo. I think this is great. There's a lot of
is
Google.
it?
That's the one, right?
So I registered this in. Yeah, it is. Google Translate index. There we go. Okay. So again, this one is registered as a plugin, which makes it a bit different here before. So before we were just replacing an input straight in the schema itself. But in this one, we're registering this as a plugin, which we could go and have a look at that new config API as well to see how that was dropped in. Here's how we register plugins. No more sanity.json. We can just throw our Google Translate plugin here. And so these are installed from NPM, but this one is installed just locally as a plugin that I have created. And now let's go back to this and enable our Google Translate input. Now this plugin exists in V2, but again, it's just a much more verbose plugin than it is now. And I can translate individual fields. So we can see in this example, we're updating the input each one. So we've put custom logic alongside every field in this object to generate this. And to see how quickly, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, it was.
I was going to add another language there.
And yeah, so this options pattern of just being able to pass in options rather than all being kind of like in a separate file or anything like that makes it super easy to just kind of keep context as a developer. No more context switching. It's all just part of the configuration.
And what I always have trouble with this plugin is that I don't actually speak any of these languages, so I'm relying on Google here. I hope this hasn't translated anything in particular. I think particularly odd. All right, excellent. So that's the Google Translate plugin. Did we miss anything on that one? I think that's right.
I don't think we did. I think we did great. Perfect. So we did two different kinds of objects essentially. But what happens when you have to assemble primitives? I think Björg spoke to that a little bit as being particularly painful. So what can we do, and how do we reduce that pain?
All right. So in our demo studio here, just to follow the story along, we have events. And they largely seem to be potato related for whatever reason. But in this event here, we know that we're going to have hosts attached to any event. Now, at the moment, this is an array of primitives. So it's an array of references here. And here's an instance where it would be good just to be able to attach all people of a particular job description, where we've got all these different job descriptions here. So this custom input could be improved by perhaps giving us quick access to be able to create templates of content to drop in there and then edit it from there. So what we have for this demo, if we go over to the event type and bring in our person selector. So again, handling arrays was particularly problematic just because of how much you had to handle yourself. But I'm just going to clear out that field now. And this is the custom component I've built here. What this one does is it queries all of those people, groups them into their job types. So we can just with one click add all of those job types as references into the field there. And if we have a look at another one of these helpers, again, we have members. So an array has members, those individual fields. We've got a component here, array of object members, and we just pass in everything that we have. But we could filter, we can add things above and below to be able to still have a working array field, but just with additional functionality.
Got it. Yeah, I remember in V2, we either had to overwrite the way that arrays were resolved and then filter out so that our function would only work for particular kinds of arrays. This one is super explicit and pretty clear.
Yeah. So now if we wanted to add chefs, I can just filter this down to add that, bring in all of these chefs here. We can see that 2 are set as invalid, but before we look at that, I'd just like to look at render input as well. So not only do we get the array field of items, we can actually even customize what each of those items look like and still get all of the affordances of the array items themselves. If I bring in my person item component, this is where the demo starts to get a bit more contrived. This is checking which of these chefs cook recipes that involve potatoes in the ingredients. So it's not a slight on these other people, but Antoinette here will be leading the charge at this event.
we're only hiring, well, we're not only hiring people who can cook potatoes, but they are privileged. These are the people that we want to have there. No,
That's right.
absolutely. Totally logical. So yeah, so these things can compose. These things can kind of be combined together. You're not, and again, so if you wanted to reuse different kinds of primitives, you're totally able to. So I think your code will be much more sustainable, maintainable.
Yes,
Perfect.
and some red squigglies there where I need to fix TypeScript errors. And I know TypeScript fans might be throwing things at the screen right now, just seeing all those red lines. But we're going to get around to it. It's been interesting. It's been good. So yeah, much to do. But we can have a look at these invalid people if we like.
Yeah, let's have a look. Let's go down to an invalid person. Why are they invalid?
So at the moment, I've got a validation issue here, checking the day of the week and checking when these people are available. So if we have a look at each of their references, we have these people here, and they have availability set. And having availability or store closing hours, opening hours, this is a really complex data structure to write, and using the built-in inputs makes that really difficult. You can see how this person's available 9 to 6 every day. If they wanted to change their time every day from 9 to 5, they'd need to jump in here, go here, find this, go back, and that's just one day, and then we go here again. So we can see how that's quite laborious to have to keep making all of those changes. And this is the exact sort of field input which was really too complex to have to recreate all yourself. But now there's so many built-in options to create this and still have validation and presence. It's really remarkable.
I think that's also a good rule of thumb for customizing your studio. What's the most painful task to attack, and how can we make it more programmatic?
That's correct. So I'm going to bring in an availability widget.
Yeah.
So now I've got a custom input that can allow us to write all those changes, even deep nested into array items and objects by writing changes to the exact same data structure, but I've replaced all of those dropdowns with autocompletes. So I can search for the time. I can change the way times are searched for. So I can search shorthand as well. I can add that and update every day of the week. I can do all weekdays at the same time, or disable days one at a time as well each. So you can see how much faster that editing experience has just become with a few custom components. Now, there's a bit of logic here, to be sure, but the amount of logic that it takes to actually render that's the big win, is that we can go over these members here and have it much simpler. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack with how this is written, but this is something you can now take on successfully and not get too concerned. And it's using all of the built-in validation errors and revealing that. So here, if I was to set this to 3 a.m., it'll throw me an error saying that the finish time must be after the starting time. So we're still getting all those built-ins of validation and presence, but it's coming straight from Sanity. It's not something I'm having to pull out of the data and double handle.
Yeah, so much of the code that we're looking at is relevant to this particular context. It's not just code that you have to make things work. And I think that's really great for working on teams or sharing code too. So yeah, excellent. All right.
So this is the all singing, all dancing example. This is far over the top, but it shows how far you can push this, and I'm looking forward to how much further people go. So.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of emergent behavior, and I'm excited for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. So we made it easy for editors to add a number of references at once. We made it easy to quickly staff our event. We used validation out of the box, but we also used some tooling to sort of make those validations work. But we can save them. We can save our editors from other annoying tasks, like maybe mentally calculating the duration of an event, right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's about giving feedback, but also custom inputs as well. So if we bring in a duration input here, what we've been able to do is use the location setting. So this is the Google Maps plugin, which is in V2, which has been ported to V3 as well. And spoilers, so we're able to pull. yes, sorry. Coming more on that coming later, but we're able to reuse that. It was mentioned in the chat there earlier, the with document to wrap custom inputs. Now this is just a React hook, so I'm able to pull the location from the document, pull the date from the document, and use those values. So what I've generated here is a component which shows in plain language the date of the event, the time, the duration, the sunrise and sunset time of the event, if that's important to you. Perhaps this event, close to closing, we want to make sure photos get taken at the magic hour or something. So perhaps we should start it a bit later in the day and bring that closer to sunset. So being able to just visualize data and update the editing experience. So now this is like an interactive drag and drop tool, which updates the start and finish times. Again, just a visual feedback for the editors, but also just a new way to interact with the same content.
So it looks much simpler if we don't have that location information, right? If that location information is not present, then we're just decorating the field.
That's right. I might have started at the end there. But yeah, if we don't have location yet, we can at least just show the length of the event. And also perhaps we could give different feedback, like 9 hours is a bit long in the tooth maybe for this event. So we can warn if you're putting that over 8 hours, that might be too long. So we can give that sort of just UI feedback. And we're going to have a look at this component as well. So the top one you were seeing there is the fancy feedback component there. The bottom one is just this standard feedback form, but you can see how this is editing object members now, is just extracting the start time, extracting the finish time, and just giving them their own individual fields.
Yeah, I just wanted to double click on that because we have conditional fields. The studio itself is super reactive. So I think it's important to note that that also happens for the component declarations that you make.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. So is this the only way? All these components are still registered in the schema, right? We're still just setting this in the schema?
Yeah, that's right. We've named them in plugins or in the scheme themselves. And actually in that plugin, it was a scheme. The plugin registered its schema and the component for that schema. But there is another way.
I'm excited.
I think this is the megaton. Like, make sure you're sitting down already. This is back in Sanity config.ts, which is really exciting. How dynamic this file can now be. So you can run all sorts of logic in this. I have a lit candle next to me with this cupcake, which I'm not sure if it even has made it into the stream, but it's actually getting a bit concerning.
You can have an explosive conclusion, maybe.
Look at this on a smoke alarm in this room.
Perfect. Adds to the drama.
I'm going to go out with a bang. The form here, the ability to render input and be able to like globally wrap components. So here we can declare that we can check over every document and every field, and based on conditions, render something different for that field. So here we're still looking at this event. And if I just uncomment all of this code here, I'm going to say here, every single field that has the ID of title now has a character count below it. And as we can see here, the field itself is rendered by just this function, just this next input props. So there's no prop handling at all. It's just purely decorating above, below, beside the field. So this would allow plugins to be able to register a method that will wrap any fields of a particular type. And this is potentially a bit too destructive or a bit too over the top to modify every field with the ID of title. So perhaps we could instead make it an opt-in setting. So if we go back to the event type, and I've got an option here, options with character count true. I can save this with no formatting. Goodness. And now we're sort of opting into the character counting there. So now any field that opts into that would receive that decoration. But I think this is going to sort of the big unlock is that if plugins don't have to handle your individual components, it means they could wrap things. So again, the question was asked about localization recently. Don't have firm plans, but I can imagine how this is going to usher in a new wave of best practices or of things that we can do because we can just wrap any component and an opt-in level as well. So the plugin could say, if you want this action, this button, this signal on this field, just opt in through the options field.
Yeah, you can be much more abstract about how you declare when a plugin works. It's much more programmatic. So no longer having to be super explicit about where you're invoking particular components. I'm looking below. we're looking at a schema type of a name. I thought a person was a document. Are you saying that this render input can work in multiple levels?
I am saying that. So if we go over to the person document type and have a look at anybody that has a...
Yeah, that might be Charles Hill or...
Oh, I was going to create one on the fly.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you can do that too. Up to you. Yeah.
We'll do it live.
Okay, great. I'm not scared about this at all.
Let's select one. What could possibly go wrong? Did I select that or not? Yeah. Oh,
perfect.
Yay.
Okay.
How about that?
It's just like my favorite social network, and now I can see all of my people in exactly the way that I like to look at them. And I think this renders throughout the studio, right? If we were to look at Brittany or anyone who has a cover photo in one of those panes that open when you look at a reference, we'll still see the same view. So this is quite a silly example, but it is a way to sort of bring the important information to the forefront for a particular document.
But if you want to talk about composability, even, like, I think I tested this before, that it still even worked with crop and hotspot. So say if we said we wanted the crop to be more on the sand, I think that, so it is the full experience of being able to customize your profile. So Sanity documents now become your own social space. And you could like, share, and subscribe perhaps right there from inside the studio.
I'm really excited to be an influencer with all my friends in the studio. I think that's going to work out really well.
Absolutely.
So that was a config API. That was custom components. We looked a little bit at workspaces. Those are, a way to sort of share content between, but I think maybe it's worth seeing how it all comes together. You don't have to have everything in one space. You can, again, be programmatic here and sort of feed these things in wherever you'd like to.
That's right. So here in create config, you can register just one config and you would just get a single workspace, or you could send in multiple, which would have their own schema, their own plugins, their own custom forms. So here we've got the food workspace. We can customize these with particular icons as well. So there's a little bit of personalization there to be able to set different icons as you move between them, but you can have different areas of concern for user groups or for organizations and still be able to administer them from the one workspace, which is really, really cool. And just because it's all now JavaScript, it can be so much more dynamic than before as well. So I think like this one here doesn't have access to the locations tool. Was it the other one that has it? Yes. So here now we've got a custom tool here to be able to see the locations of all of the events that are taking place. But for the food workspace doesn't really need access to that. So we don't register that plugin to their studio.
And I think, as you can see, if you're used to experimental spaces, no refresh. It's all just kind of happening very quickly, that same speed.
Yeah, and I think you couldn't even filter out tools. I think I've written a number of scripts that will like rewrite sanity.json on deploy based on branch names or something. Like that's how far you would have to go to make that dynamic. But now you can just run that logic straight inside one file, which is just excellent.
Yeah, for a number of reasons, I think this will be huge for people who have to manage lots of studios like us.
Yeah. Yes. Excellent.
Yes.
I think we covered everything.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much for taking us on this whirlwind tour of particular food item heavy studio.
Yes. And we'll see you at your next potato-based event, I suppose.
Oh, Cap, you're muted.
Now can you hear me?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I just said so many potatoes. Now I'm craving hash browns or French fries or something. But yeah, thanks so much for this demo. There's a lot of like explosion emojis happening in the chat. A lot of like silence where nobody was talking because it was just a lot going on.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, a very good sign. But a couple questions. Number one, somebody asked about the repo link. I don't know if for this demo, if that's going to be shared or anything on those lines or no.
I think that's the age-old question for every demo we put together.
We've done this twice in a month, I think, is put together a demo that we haven't been able to share, but soon.
if nothing else, those plugins are definitely things I want to release. That availability calendar is an idea I've sat on for far too long, but like I said, I just didn't want to handle all of the internal affordances. The logic I used to run just to pull validation from the V2 setup was no good. So it'll be a V3 only plugin when it's released, but definitely those duration plugins, the duration plugin and the availability plugin, those will be on the exchange soon.
Okay, so keep an eye out on the exchange. And then another question, I don't know if this was answered, but is it possible to arrange order fields depending on, say, role?
Oh, order of fields is a good one.
Yeah.
I can't answer that one, actually. You'd be able to pull the role context. You might be able to invoke the user's role when the schema is registered and reorder them on the fly. You could probably put like an options, an order key inside the options key of every field, or like an object of the user role names and what order they should appear in. Sorry, that's what I do. I run REST to solutions. Yes, with enough heavy lifting, you could probably do that, but there's not a built-in. This role has this order for a field. Okay.
And then with all the love that was in the chat, one of my favorite comments was the ease of making these custom components just push Sanity into a league of its own. And then also that Sanity had to like compete with itself. Like there were no competitors, but Sanity came in and one-upped itself. So there's a lot of love in the chat. So thank you so much for presenting, and thank you so much for the flags, the candle, the balloons, all of it, the 2 balloons. See ya. The mini 3 balloon in the back. I appreciate that. But yeah, good stuff. Welcome to the launch party, everyone. Right on. Well, thank you so much, Simeon and Carolina, and everyone can find them in Slack, by the way. I know I keep saying but that is where you can find them. Thank you so much.